Greetings everyone. Welcome to Avon Valley Church's Youth, Children and Families Sunday evening Bible study. My name is Jan. This is my naughty little rescue dog, but she's lovely, called Susie. You've met her before. Say hello, Susie. Wave to the kids. Wave to everybody. Actually, she's been quite good, but she's out of a shock. You know, I told you she loves running along the River Avon on her walk every day. Last week, unbeknown to Susie, unbeknown to me, a swan was feeding right by the bank with its head deep down. Susie could smell it, ran to the bank. Then suddenly the swan leapt up and they were beak to nose. It frightened me, and it frightened both the swan and Swan started to hiss and go cross. But luckily, suddenly, Susie backed, the swan backed, and all was well. It could have been nasty. She was a lucky girl. Anyway, today's story is about David and Jonathan. But David had been selected by God through his prophet Samuel. He was to be the next king, but now he served at the court of the present king, Saul. David was a fine young man, and when the king got into a black mood, David would play his harp and sing to calm the king. Jonathan was the son of King Saul, and he and David were best friends. But King Saul of Israel had very troublesome enemies living in the next country. They were called Philistines. They were always invading Israel and trying to steal their land. King Saul was very fed up with them, but he was also fed up with David because David was so popular and the King Saul was jealous. That was very sad. King Saul was not very popular because he suffered from very scary moods, bad mood swings. Sometimes he was nice and then flash, bang, wallop. He was horrid and a bit crazy. Also, King Saul was a bit of a schemer. He decided to send David to lead the troops into battle against the Philistines. But he didn't give David enough soldiers. That way, he thought, David's men will be beaten and David will die in battle. Well, David had been brought up in the country and he used to be a shepherd. So he always studied the land before he took action. Also, he had super spies who secretly watched the enemy. Best of all, David was very good at planning how to beat his enemy. Well, Susie's just leaving us. Bye, Susie. She's got bored, sorry. One day, the great Philistine army was marching towards a place where they planned to fight David's army. But on the way, they had to climb up a very steep hill with all their armour on. Oh dear, they soon got exhausted. Well, they were nearly at the top when a trumpet sounded just above them. They looked up and there was David with his soldiers looking down at them and laughing. "We're waiting for you," shouted David. Well, the Philistines turned round and ran down the hill as fast as they could, throwing away spears and swords and helmets and shields as they ran to escape. It was a great victory for David. Another time, the Philistines learned that David was in a valley with a very small force of soldiers. So they gathered a big army, marched up the valley to beat him. Sure enough, there was David and his men ready for battle. They were so few, the Philistines were so many. The Philistines stopped and got ready for the charge. But then a trumpet sounded, and a strong force of David's men came out of hiding on their left. Another trumpet sounded, and a large force of David's men appeared on their right. The Philistines suddenly realised David was so popular that lots more soldiers had joined him. Then another trumpet sounded, this time behind them. They turned round and saw another force of David's men who were following them. They were trapped, so they had to surrender. They were all made to take off their armour, put down all their weapons. Then they were allowed to walk home to their own country. David was a great leader. Everyone loved him except King Saul. Saul was so jealous. All the people like David and now they don't like me, he thought. King Saul decided David must go. But David wanted to stay, and he remained loyal to King Saul. He wanted to serve him. Now David's best friend was King Saul's son, a boy called Jonathan. They were about the same age. Jonathan warned David, "It's no longer safe for you to be at my father's court. When my father has too much to drink, he does such silly things. It would be dangerous for you to be there." Now, there was about to be a big feast. They had decided that David shouldn't attend. Jonathan said, "When the feast is over, I need to secretly advise you of what my father has decided concerning you." David said, "You must be careful because your father's spies will be watching you, Jonathan." So they made a plan. After the feast, Jonathan would go out early with his bow and his arrows. He would take a servant. And when the servant went to collect the arrows, if Jonathan shouted, "The arrows are behind you," David would know that he must flee for his life. But if Jonathan shouted, "The arrows are near you," then David would know that it was safe for him to return, for David was still loyal to King Saul. David and Jonathan planned that one day they would be reunited, but for now they might need to be apart. They gave each other a great hug. They even cried a bit. Then they parted. At the feast, King Saul got into a furious rage and shouted, "I don't trust David. Capture him. Bring him to me, alive or dead." Jonathan was heartbroken. The next morning he got up early, took his bow and arrows, and with a servant lad went up to the practice field. Saul's spies were secretly watching him. Jonathan fired off his arrows, with some hitting the target, some going over into the grass beyond. Then he sent the lad to collect the arrows. "There are more arrows behind you," Jonathan shouted. David, hiding, heard and understood this was a warning message. "Make haste," he continued. And as Jonathan was leaving, he seemed to drop something. He turned and bent low, as if to pick it up. But David knew it was a farewell salute. And as soon as they'd gone, David sadly sped off to escape. He and Jonathan might never, ever meet again. As he left, David composed this song. Saul and Jonathan, father and son, leaders fearless in battle, swifter than swooping eagles, stronger than proud lions. Saul, great king of Israel, my harp calmed your mind when the black moods came. I would that I could still serve you. Jonathan, my beloved friend, what adventures we shared. I leave in such great sadness and fear I may see you no more. Oh, thank you for joining us. Take care, stay safe, and God be with you. Goodbye. Susie's gone. She can't say goodbye.